Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season two of Conversations in Pop Culture. And before I introduce my guest, I do want to remind everybody that links are up above. So my guest's Kickstarter is up there along with Buy Me a Coffee. And so obviously I want everybody to go back the Kickstarter as well as Buy Me a Coffee because every donation helps make this show work and possible. And even going beyond that, please share this around. It means so much to me. So without further ado, I have comic creator Asher Humm on. So welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Buy me a coffee too. I would like a coffee.
I need caffeine. I need coffee. It's a donation site. I need it all. I'm broke. I'm broke, lonely, and the only good thing that I got going on is I enjoy comics. So, and you have a comic that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
That's coming on Kickstarter. It has about 21 days, I think, left, and that's Leftphobia, and
Done
it's
19
beyond
days.
interesting. It is beyond interesting. It is definitely outside the box. I actually read your book, which you
Oh, great.
sent, which is super, super helpful. And it's 6/7 stories. So, what is the basic premise? And they're interconnecting, sort of. I don't know how to
Yeah.
describe it exactly.
Um, it's weird. It's like after 7 years of working on the book, and then like the past year of just trying to promote it a little bit. I ran a failed Kickstarter, and I was just talking to a consultant last week. And she's like, "Oh, well, there's no theme, this and that." But she's like, the title kind of makes you think of like an existentialism. And I'm like, huh. It's the first time I actually thought about it. I was like, technically, if you want to give this book a theme, it's existentialism, which is, I think, it fitting. I mean, none of the stories are specifically connected. There's no obvious theme, but in the end, you're looking at um, nothing has an expected ending. Nothing's really happy. Um,
And so let's dive into this a little bit because what is the book? Because it basically we sort of have a guy waiting for a bus, and then
mhm.
interwoven is all these different stories of either people he witnesses doing something, or somebody sitting on a bus doing something, or somehow it gets connected back to him, and then it gets connected out of him again. And so where did this idea even come from? Because it's very cool, and I actually enjoyed the story because I thought it was sort of out of the box and very interesting. I think the theme of it is just that it's somebody's everyday life, and all these stories are connected to this guy while he waits for doing a mundane activity. And I think that it's not that hard to get what this book is.
Yeah, so it's like one of those things. I started out, just a comic book artist wanting to get in the field, and I've done things with people, and then I'd have people, give me scripts, and I'd look at them and like these, a lot more work, and I just got tired of looking for a writer to work with, and I had ideas of my own, and I was taking public transportation to work all the time, so I started coming up with these ideas. So about 2013, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to write my own book. I'm just going to take these stories that are in my head and I'm just going to write them and see what happens. So the stories just start out as just things that I came up with that I wanted to write. And the interconnected story of the guy waiting for the bus is actually semi-autobiographical. The locations are real. The my way, so it comes down from my one job that I had where I started writing it. I worked at a fast signs, which is a sign shop, and I would take the trolley into 69th Street Terminal, and then take the bus to St. Joe's University, and then stand there waiting for that bus to take me to work. And that bus was always late. It was like there was one time I waited over an hour, and then I ended up walking to work. I found out walking was faster than waiting for the bus. And that's where that basically came down to. I was standing there for a while. So it's representation of me. That is the actual bus stop I stood at. Those are the actual buses I rode on. That's the actual trolley and trolley stop that was by my house. And even at the end, when he finally makes it to work, spoilers, not really, that was actually my job. That was the place I worked at before it burnt down. and they've rebuilt it, but the whole black stone diagonal wall, that was what it looked like when we first moved into that shop. So, and the people at the end there also are representations of the people I worked with. Um, so it's, you know, I didn't really sit there waiting for a bus and then have like a bunch of stories kind of play in front of me, but I've experienced that wait, that ride, that frustration of where is this bus and why isn't it here situation.
And then and to even go further into this, because so you're the character is waiting for the bus, and that's your representation. But then
Yeah.
what starts happening is that stories sort of get interwoven, and there's six stories, and the burden is the first one. And we might be ruining some of this. I'm going to try not to ruin as much of it as I can't possibly ruin, but it focuses on Emily, who has taken a temp job in New York City and pretty much,
Correction on that one. That's Philadelphia.
oh, my bad, my bad. It looks like New York, and I don't know the difference between New York and
Yeah, that
Philadelphia.
first
Clearly.
page who gets off the bus, that's actually Philadelphia skyline. I took some pictures off of Google and used them.
Fair enough. I stand corrected. But
Okay.
obviously, she's taking a temp job, and her life hasn't exactly worked out the best way. And then she takes this job, and it seems to be okay. But then, as the issue and the story goes on further and further, more and more is sort of put on her, and people are relying on her more and more. And she's sort of comforting and taking their burden and sort of calming them down. And pretty much things just get shittier and shittier, and then she's confronted with this thing called the burden, which is a creature-esque, almost spiritual thing that says you want everything to go back to normal. You're going to have to continue taking people's burdens. And this is a very interesting story because we see it slowly progressing. And it's very, very beautiful how it starts off very, very little and it gets a little bit more intense and more and more and more. She's taking on more and more of the burden, and then she's ultimately confronted with that choice of what she wants to do. And so, what was this like really building this up? Because it is super interesting. And it's also the idea of making this sacrifice, one for all type of mentality to make, for somebody to sacrifice and deal with that. And then to even have that on them where everybody can go back to being happy, but you're going to have to be miserable. And she makes a choice, and I'm not going to say which choice she makes.
Yeah, that story. It was inspired from someone I used to see on the trolley. It was this woman who always looked like she was uncomfortable, but yet managed to smile. Like there was one time she was talking to somebody, I guess she knew, and she's smiling, but yet at the same time her eyebrows are like furrowed, where she's like worried. And it's kind of, I felt like it was interesting, like how someone who just always worried, but yet still able to um, smile at the same time, and it was just kind of an interesting kind of feature, and that's what kind of inspired that story. And I had a friend who was a former English teacher kind of helped me adjust the story a little bit to get to where it was, and a former coworker actually titled it for me. I couldn't think of what to call it, but the burden, I think, is the most apt title that could possibly be fit for that.
And I just love how it just starts off very, very slow. And there's something very nice about what is known as a slow burner, where
Mm-hmm.
you're not going right into it and it's just naturally progressing. I'm not too sure if this is 28 or 32 pages, but it's very, very nice in how it goes all the way up. And the pacing on it is
Yeah,
really, really well done.
yeah, it's a 13-page story. It's originally planned to be a lot shorter. All those stories were planned to be shorter than they ended up being. So
But what is that even like? Because I mean, obviously you did most of it. I think you did all the writing and you've done the art on
yeah.
it, and so it's just like what is that even like for you? And obviously we're going to get into the rest of the stories in a second here, but what is that like for you? Because obviously it is an advantage if you're the artist and the writer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is an advantage to it because you know what you're envisioning in your head as you're writing it. So when you go to draw it, you have that vision, and then you can always make the corrections as you go. And it's like I would write things, as a script. As I was taught in college to write comic script was to, page by page, panel by panel, descriptions and everything else like that. I wrote it as if I wasn't going to draw it mostly. Um, but even then, as you start to lay out the pages and the thumbnails, you realize that this needs to be stretched here. You get your pacing is sometimes a little off on your vision on when you're writing, and you have to extend your pacing. So when I say it was originally supposed to be shorter, I think maybe originally planned to be an 8-page story, and it just kind of grew itself. And I was worried that it would seem too slow, like sort of little repetitive as it went on and on and on. But hearing you, I'm glad to hear that it like that slow burn feel. It doesn't make you feel that way, and that was my concern at the very beginning. I'm like, am I just getting boring and just
I'll be honest. You know what it is? Once you get into the middle of it, you start understanding why it's going slow. So, like the first 2, 3, 4 pages, it's like, okay, this is where we're going. And then when you start realizing that it's getting more and more intense, that's where this starts to make a lot more sense. And that's what I think is very interesting about this story in particular, is that the first few pages, you're like, she seems to sort of just be in a whining world type situation until then when you get to page like 6 and 7 on it, you're like, oh, okay, this is slowly increasing. And then towards the back end, it makes a lot of sense because the seeds were planted. And that's what I think people need to understand when they're reading this story, is that there's a lot of stuff that's done in the beginning that's extremely relevant to the end.
cool. Thank you.
And to even go further, because obviously this sort of ends, and then we go into another story, and this is the adventures of Dorian Tesla, and this is sort of the exact opposite, where this story starts off really fast, where he's pretty much about to be crushed and eaten by a gigantic squid kraken type creature, and then we backtrack. And obviously, Dorian is a spy, sort of 1960s vibe to him, has a lot of gadgets, knows how to get himself in and out of trouble. And then from there, we go backwards and he's breaking the fourth wall and he's in the middle of like a spy fight. And then, we go backwards and forwards at the same time in a bunch of ways. And this is just a crazy story and it's fun. And on the surface, it has no connection until the end to, our main character who's waiting for the bus. So what was this like? Because this is sort of that fun spy vibe type comic that's just action. And we sort of have a sarcastic character, but he's also sort of the guy we're rooting for and telling us what he's doing. And he's got like 10 rules.
Yeah. That the rule part was one of my favorite parts, especially when the improvise that he throws the scalpel and misses. Oh, that really gets me. But oh yeah, and the Italian curse word. I looked that up, and I had 2 different Italians look that over, and they were just like, they laughed because they knew the word. It was spoken around the house a couple of times, so they were familiar with that curse word. But yeah, Dorian was actually one of my first ideas for it. He's a mismatch of characters that were conceived of at various different times. I had some spy character I came with in high school that was more like kind of lizard looking of sorts, but an idiot. And the other one was a friend came up with that we were supposed to use in a comic book. We never did. It was Adder Jack. It was a kung fu voodoo king from New Jersey. And was gay. And so I took, and then, I think it was later on my friend, proposed the idea of the character working for a spy agency, looking like he's in his like late 50s, and balding. And I was like, that's hilarious. And then we put on top of it the fact that he has like absolutely no grasp of modern technology. So in the story when he grabs the cell phone, he doesn't know how to use it at all. Which puts him on the search for a payphone, which is just rare these days in the first place, nonetheless a working one. And it was just like, so it was a 12-page story I had initially conceived of that it was going to be, and it just it kept growing and growing, and it was 23 pages when I was told by two different people that they were lost. They didn't know how he got in the squid. So I had to add the extra page of him falling through the squid's stomach and bumping on that boat, which was actually one of my favorite scenes. He's a character I want to I have long plans to continue on with. I have 19 issues written and so many more ideas to do with him, and he's just so much more depth to him than what is just on the surface of this story. But the idea that he looks like a curmudgeony old white guy who has no grasp of technology, but yet gets himself in these inane, outlandish adventures is lots of fun.
And so to even talk about that, because you mentioned something, you have some other stuff planned for him.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's the thing about, anthology work and interconnecting stories where, this is obviously connected to the main character who's waiting at the bus, but also this in many ways is almost a sampler where
Mhm.
we don't know if these stories are really happening or this main character is imagining it, but I don't think it really matters to the point of the fact that you can enjoy different samplings in a lot of ways. And that's what I really also like about this book is that we're getting a bunch of different sampling and also a bunch of different styles. And then obviously this can launch a bunch of different characters out into your world. And that's kind of cool too, because obviously that's what happens with books that are like this, where somebody might not like the burden, but they might love Dorian. And that's what's very cool is that there's something for everybody so far. We only spoke about two of the stories so far, but that's what's cool about this is that, so there's a fly, everybody. Me and the fly, we're not getting along. But that's what I love about this too, is that this is almost the exact opposite of the burden. And it's like, when I'm reading this, I'm reading a very, choice driven story and sacrificial story. And then I'm driven just about a ridiculous spy who we don't even know what his mission is. And it's great because you don't need to in that. So I love the fact that there's two styles so far in this. And then there was a shorter story as well, which is The Ticket. And this is just about, whether, and I'm not too sure if this actually happened or it was a dream or possibly a combination, but basically some guys either dream or they win the lottery. And they're talking about what they're going to do. And then it's a very short story in that regard of just them sort of just, what would it be like if I was rich? Is what I get. And it's kind of how they cross paths with the main character with the poster right outside the newsstand that he is waiting around. So what was that? Just having like a nice little short breathing story in there.
Well, that was my senior thesis in college, and we had to make conceive of a minimum of 4 pages, and so I had it all like thumbnailed out, and I was only really required to draw 1 page because of like we were running out of time, so I only drew 1 page out of that. So when I was trying to put things together, I was like, oh, I might as well just throw this in. It's already a complete story, beginning to end. I had the whole thing written out and sketched out. It's like didn't have to put really thought to it. But it's just a fun little story. And I had a friend I was talking to a couple weeks ago, and he was like one of the first people to read the book, and he was saying that one of the reasons that ended up, I think, on the top of his favorite of the stories in the book list is that it was sort of a different take on lottery ticket stories. There's people who win or people who lose. And then people who win, there's either the joy of winning or the stress of that you've won it and everyone wants your money. And this is like you get both. I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much, but you get both in the same thing, a win and lose, all at once. And it's kind of fun and a kind of a relief on the idea of winning a lottery ticket.
And then also what I like about this story is that it leads right into the next story where this entire story is that while these guys are sort of experiencing both sides of that, it also starts raining and our main character while waiting winds up getting a newspaper and using it as an umbrella. And I'm sure that's not the first time I've seen people do that. And then obviously, I view that as possibly, the dream being over. You can interpret it that way. You can interpret it as a loss, and then when it's sunny out, he gets a new newspaper, and he opens it up and basically opens it up to a book review of The Last Sun. And obviously, it's a review of it, and that leads right into that story. So, what was that like introducing that story? Because it's a very clever way how to introduce it. And obviously, The Last Sun, when we get into it in a second, is obviously a story within a story about astronauts and where humanity has gone and a variety of other things that are happening with humans. So, what was that like having a really clever entryway in? Because this is, I think, one of the best entry points in
Oh,
the
really?
entire
Thank
book.
you. Um, you know, well, the first story that I conceived of to make this connection was the end of Dorian Tesla, to have him walking down the street and seeing our guy. So everything else I kind of had to figure out how to connect them. That one, I'm not even sure. I think it's just because there used to be newspaper stands at that stop, and they're like free papers, free city papers. And I guess I was just thinking, what would be a good way of how would you incorporate a science fiction space related story into a modern world scenario? And it's like you can't just like walk into it. Um, so I think that was I don't even know how I even came up with that idea, but I think it was like just sort of like, oh, well, that would
Because it's
work.
almost putting a story within a story within a story, because he's almost reading like the review, and like you can interpret it as him reading the review of what is the book on what the story inside the story is, and then you get into like the meta of it all, and that's how I read it. And maybe that's not how it's supposed to be read, but I
It's
almost
true,
read it
yeah.
like he's.
Yeah, it's a story within a story within a story within a story. It
And
keeps
and so
going.
like I read it super meta, and then I'm like, this is really really clever. Where we have now a logical entry point into something, and then we get this story about how you know Earth is dying, and this sun is sort of killing everything, and this astronaut is going from planet to planet, trying to warn people, and people are sort of responding in a negative way, and then he's dying, and it's his first and last, and then ultimately people really weren't paying attention, and now they have to live underground because like the world is messed up that they're on. And so obviously it's the story of, I guess, a father telling his son who's looking out at the stars during nighttime how we got here to some
Yeah,
degree.
more like the last lack of stars, is that's part of the story, is that all the stars started to disappear, and they're two suns of the last two in the universe.
Mm-hmm. And so what was even this like to conceive this idea? Because once you start getting into almost the meta, which is it's a story inside a story, it gets, very interesting on what's happening, because you don't have to make it seem like it's being told, but then you have to get that kicker in, and it sort of has to flow a certain way. And it's a very cool meta concept.
Um, well, it just started out with the conversation between the father and son. That was what popped in my head to begin with. It was just, a father and son talking about how things used to be it didn't used to be like this. And I think that was like one of the first lines that I came up with. And it was just like I guess I was conceiving of like, this end of the world kind of thing, and then it just some of the stories, it just flow out. Like sometimes you don't even think about what you're writing, and they just kind of pen themselves, and you just make changes when it's done.
And also, what it is, it's also like the vibe I got out of this story was that, I'm sure that your parents and my parents said, oh, it used to be that we had this in the day, and it used to not always be this way, and things used to, remain the same, and, certain things. And I don't know about you and what you think about movie theaters, but I think movie theaters are going to become obsolete in the next 10 years. And I think, when I have kids, I'm going to be like, oh, it used to not always be that we had streaming. It used to not always be that, Space Jam 2 wasn't just at a click of a button. It's like that's how I view this. Obviously at a much higher level, but it's very interesting when you have that. Oh, there used to be more stars at night. There used to be more things. Humanity used to actually have a thriving possibility, and now it's clear that they're dwindling. And here's how we got here. So it's very cool. It's a very like humbling story in a lot of ways.
Gosh, I really hope that the theaters don't. It's like that would
I'm
be
just full of
just seeing
negativity.
something. I know, but just thinking about that, seeing something on the big screen, there's just nothing like that, And the smaller movies you don't really need to, but those action movies, it's like there's nothing like seeing an action movie on the big screen. It just kind of that would be sad to not be able to do that.
But you get my point though
Oh,
with
I
the
do, very
idea
much.
that this is how things used to not be, and that's where this story is. And it's very cool though that the kid is wanting to continue to watch the last two stars and recognizes also like there's a lot of stuff to break down on psychology with this story alone. And so I mean it's just really thought provoking. And so,
It's
like when you're writing, I know you say stories just flow, but what is that like? Because a lot of this stuff makes you think. It makes you say, "Hey, wait a second. Like, what if I was in that situation?" And that's something that I really want people to understand when they back this Kickstarter is that you're really backing, six different stories, seven if you include, the guy interjecting in between each story leading into them. And it's all in different styles. And also, a lot of this stuff is thought provoking in that you could read it every 6 months and have a different reaction to it. And this is the type of book that I feel like you could read in 4 years from now and have a different reaction depending on where you are at in your life. And that's something that's super interesting about this.
well, that's just that's my ego is being very much rubbed right now. That makes me
No,
feel
no, no,
really
no,
good.
but I'm not trying to.
I know. It's. I mean, when you read something that you really like, you'll talk it up, and it doesn't really matter if that person hears you or not. It's just hearing it. I mean, it makes me even more proud of my work, I liked my work, but every time I have someone read it, it makes me even more proud of my work because I always get these reactions. Um, different, and everyone's reaction is completely different from the other person. I mean, everyone's point of view from what they've read is completely different, and everyone has a different story that they like the most. That's also what I like the most about the book is that it's like no matter what, there's a story for somebody in this, and that's wasn't my original intention. None of people's reaction, the existential kind of concepts that people are getting out of the book were never my original intentions. I didn't like go forward and thinking, well, what's the most like, what can you get to this, and what's the most depth you can get out of the story? It was just I just wrote a story, but they apparently have just been, coming across in so many different ways that how original it is, and it just it's heartwarming for one. I mean, this is my
So
first
to
foray into
even talk
writing.
about that, so to even talk about the extent existentialism, obviously I've read, No Exit. I've read, The Virgin Suicides, which deals with that. And, obviously there's some episodes in The Sopranos that deal with that. And so, but I'm no expert on existentialism, but I understand a little bit about it. And it's the I so and to even go further because and I'm curious how you feel because I think 5 years ago these stories couldn't be told. And I think now with indie creators and indie comics being so prevalent and Kickstarter being such a viable platform, this is actually can be told and people are interested in this and that there is a market for it. And so I'm curious how you feel about that because obviously 5 years ago, indie comics were not as big. And also, I think people are sick of superheroes. Like, personally, I'm tired of superheroes. And
Yeah,
I love Batman and Superman, but it doesn't suit me anymore. Like, I'll read a Batman comic every once in a while, but it's not what like gets my mind thinking, or it's not what I'm interested in reading. I'm more interested in some more obscure stuff right now, or some more, things like the Black Dahlia, which I'm reading right now, which is about that horrendous crime in LA. And
Yeah.
so that to me though couldn't have been done 5 years ago. And a book like yours, I don't think could have been done 5 years ago either.
Wow, because I started it 8 years ago. but
But,
so
but, but
it couldn't have
you
been
see
done.
where I'm
But I
going
think
with
it was
it.
on the edge of where it was for the beginning.
But the idea is that I think this is viable now. I think people are
Yeah.
interested. I think that the indie market is big enough that this type of story and this is actually viable. And even just the fact that indie comics now as a whole are actually competitive and that people are looking for alternative content. Where I know that you started this like 8 years ago, but I feel like indie has reached the point where these types of stories can now be crowdfunded appropriately and published, and that there's a market for it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm definitely on the page of I'm not a big superhero fan. The superhero comics I get, which are few and far between, um, are definitely not your norm. You know, I was a big fan of Squirrel Girl when that was out. I initially got that from my daughter, but then found it was awesome and started collecting it myself.
You
Um,
mean you took it from your daughter for yourself? That's what you mean?
well, I bought it for her, and then I ended up reading it and keeping them.
No, 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 no. You stole it. We all know the truth. You're just trying to
She
look
didn't
like a
ask
good
for it.
father. It's all right.
I just thought she'd like this. But I mean, yeah. So I got into Squirrel Girl. I liked the Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, and I've always been a fan of Hawkeye. And to take him and make him like a normal person, he's still Hawkeye, but you have your humanity added to Hawkeye. And the old man Hawkeye, I like that because that's like it's still the same kind of concept. The humanity, but he's going blind. Um, and I mean, there's just like the Kurt Busiek's Marvel's story I really like, but it's Busiek. He does Astro City, which is the same kind of thing. We're taking the superheroes, but we're giving it humanity
You
into
mean
the
it's the better
story.
My Hero Academia?
Was that?
Astro City is the better My Hero Academia.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't. I've watched a few episodes. My daughter was watching it, and I find that show really boring. So it would
I
definitely be the
love
better
I
My
love
Hero.
I
Was that?
love Astro City. I love Astro
Oh, yeah.
City. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant comic, and it's great. The '90s version of it was great, and the 2000 what I think 13 or 14 or 15 was good too, but it wasn't as good as the original.
I mean, you don't really like lose. Like it's all like the great thing about Astro City is you always have a jumping on point, and you never have to know what happened before because each one's somebody else's perspective on what's going on, and the superhero lives are really not the life you're focusing on. You're focusing on the person who's surrounded by the superheroes. What we would be like if there were superheroes, just us and then our life. And the way he's doing Marvels, it's kind of like a mix of the two, and he's throwing in like a lot of the '60s, so you get this classic stuff, even characters before they become the heroes to the modern day, and so you're kind of seeing these things from both angles, but yet they're still like one of the more recent ones. You have Mr. Fantastic and Ben Grimm as before they were Mr. Fantastic and the Thing, and it's like so you even though they're now superheroes, we're looking at them at the human perspective, and all the villains that become villains eventually, like MODOK, we just see MODOK as the human he was before he was MODOK. Um, so those are the kind of stories I get into when there's superheroes involved. I'm not into the endless battle, and to me, I feel like most of these people should be dead, and all of them should have PTSD, like really bad. The fact that they constantly want to fight and are ready to fight, it's like uh, military people aren't like that. I mean, there's a certain point where they want to fight. They're all gung ho about the thing, and then after a while, it gets to you. You see your friends die, and then how much more of your mind screw up would there be? Is not only do you see your friends die over and over again, but they keep on coming back. You won't even know how to trust reality anymore. And I mean, at that point, you're like, oh, my mom's dead, but she'll be back.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think. Obviously, your book doesn't deal with death and that type of consequence, but there is still consequence, and that's the other thing that I think is very important as well. Where I think that's another reason why indie is thriving is that in an indie comic, in issue one, if you kill off a character, they're not coming back in issue two unless that's what the book is, because there are a few books where people are like immortal, and that's a very different book, but it's well stated. But for the most part, like that's what I think the problem with mainstream is that if you kill off Batman, I want Batman dead for the next 50 issues in a row. That's what I want, because now we're actually doing something interesting where it's kind of like in the first 4 panels, if you have a Batman title, what if we killed off Bruce Wayne and we killed them off for 25 issues? And now it was the idea that, okay, who's the next Batman? And now we're having trials to figure out who the next Batman is over the next 25 issues. And then that guy has a run. And then Bruce comes back, but Bruce is not Batman anymore. And then there's a whole, quest to become Batman again, and whether Bruce steps in or not. Then you have an interesting comic. And that would actually make probably DC a fuck ton of money, too, if they did
That
it the
was a
right way.
really great concept. I mean, the one thing I have given Marvel credit for, and it's the one major death, is Thunderbird is still dead. He died, and he died. That's it. His brother came out, great, but Thunderbird is still dead. We've lost so many X-Men characters, and yet we've gotten them back so many various different ways. The Thunderbird remains dead. And I was mad when Bucky came back, and I was mad when Robin came back. It's like they were dead. They were dead. Oh, and it was like, oh well, the concept of how they came back makes a lot of sense. So, it's like, oh, really? Robin died and was buried, but now he's the Red Hood. How how did that happen? Bucky, I can accept. Oh, we thought he was dead, but he was really just, hijacked by Hydra. Okay, still, Bucky should have been dead. Um, but Thunderbird is dead. And the funny thing is, I actually have a storyline in my mind that would integrate Thunderbird into the story, but he's still dead. And in the end, he's still dead. It's just you'd go into more of an underworld, afterlife connection with him that would make him part of the story, but he's not able to be brought back to the life.
Yeah, I like when people die in comics, and I like when they stay dead or crippled or paralyzed or anything of that nature. I like real consequences. And then
Yeah,
obviously, I want to get back to your book, though, because I do want to talk about trending water, because we clearly are right now on Marvel and DC. And this is super interesting because basically a plane crashes, a guy sort of survives, and his entire life is flashing before him, but the only problem is that it's not his life that's going before his eyes. And this is a very interesting thing. I mean, I think everybody's been in situations where they see their life flashing before them at one point or another, whether it's a short part of your life or a fast part of your life or everything that's going on. But I don't think anybody's ever seen not their life flash before them in that circumstance. And the kicker here is that this is all done in watercolors for the most part, which is really cool. And when we talk about an indie book, getting the ability to experiment with watercolors, because you hate to go back to Marvel and DC or even Image, they might not allow you to do that type of work for 12 or 15 or 20 pages. And it's really nice to have a different art style in there and have a completely different medium in there. So what was that like? Because that's a very different beast in of itself.
that whole story is my oldest one. I actually wrote that in '96 when I was in high school. Um, the flight that they're on is the famous TWA flight 800 that was heading towards Paris, France, and crashed in the middle of the ocean. And to this day, they still don't know what caused that crash. Um, and in fact, one of my favorite bands, which pretty much nobody knows of, called Elysian Fields. They're from New York, but they're really famous in France, especially Paris, whatever. So the lead singer had a ticket on that flight to go to France, and she ended up having to cancel it. So she skirted death. And I forget which comic book creator. There's a famous comic book creator that works at Marvel whose sister was on that plane. Um, so the concept came from that. And even though it wasn't inspired by I like to refer to that story as my occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think I have, so I'm not exactly familiar.
So it's an old short story that there was a foreign film made, a short film that was used on Twilight Zone, even though it wasn't filmed for Twilight Zone. I think it was used in one of the earliest episodes, not the first. And the whole there's not really much speaking, except the words that are used are from the military and it's in another language. But basically, you have a guy who is about to be hung off a bridge, the Owl Creek Bridge. And they count down and they drop the board and he falls and the rope snaps and he falls in the river and he swims away and they're shooting at him or whatever. And he keeps on swimming and swimming and finally he gets to apparently his property, sees his beautiful bride, and he's running up to her, arm stretched. She's running up to him, arm stretched, and right as they're about to embrace, the rope around his neck snaps and he dies. It was this short time of him falling that he imagined him escaping and succeeding. But the fantasy is cut short. And so I see the treading water as sort of that, even though it's not really that. You have a guy who's in a plane crash. Everyone's dead. His family's dead. And as you said, he sees his life flash before his eyes, but it's not his life. And then, I don't want to ruin the end, but it's kind of an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge sort of ending.
And what's really cool about this is that this is the majority of this story is done in watercolor. And
Yeah.
so what was that like? Because that's a very cool concept to do. And it's obviously very different than the other stories, just visually. And the idea of what you could do with watercolor is not the same that you could do with digital art or even Copic marker or even just like marker work or line work or pencils, because it's just watercolors lend a different style and a different texture feel. Because this story feels different and it looks different, and the texture of it, I guess if that makes any sense of what it looks like
Yeah.
on the paper, is significantly different.
Being that the sub story, which is the most biggest chunk of that story, is basically supposed to be not his life. It's supposed to be, sort of a fantasy of something or whatever. I had to think of something. If everything else is going to be computer color, we need to be able to take you out of it somehow. And black and white wouldn't really do it. And yeah, you could digitally color it in like more subdued tones, but that wouldn't really, strike it really either, because there's a lot of visuals in that are just, colors are a huge part of it. So I had concepted earlier that should be watercolor, and that was the last story I finished, and it was the hardest because I drew the whole thing out on my computer, and I had to make sure that all the lines were as tight as possibly could be, so I could print them out, trace them on a light table with pencil. And then it was basically supposed to be on the final paper. Well, what I did was I put it on cardstock, and that's not very good with watercolor. So I actually had to do that twice. I had to get myself some watercolor paper and then retrace the whole thing. The very, definite, defined line. There's no scratchiness to the line. They're very specific. So, and then I had to research how to um, watercolor a comic in the right way. So basically, I would get them taped down, stretched out on corrugate, and I would have 4 pages on a table, and I'd work all 4 pages at once. This color to that color, and then once those are done, take it off and do the next one. And I had to teach myself the proper way of doing the layering on watercolor. I've done watercolor, but never like to this extent. And I basically had to learn the skill of watercoloring the whole thing, and the layering is different for watercolor than it is anything else, because no matter what, even if you let it dry and put something on it, you're re-wetting the color, so it's going to change it. But you want that blend still, and it's harder to make the blend just custom and put right next to it instead of just putting a thin layer or something on top of it. And you had to try to make it the best to not get it murky, which you can easily do. So that was the hardest one I worked on, but also my favorite story.
And it's very cool, and it's a nice little thing to do because it's not done that frequently in comics. And obviously, it's something that's really cool. And I just showed up the picture and I showed it again, and I think that's what you mean. The middle one, for those who can see, that's kind of the blending where you could see, the guy's, legs, sort of through the water and making that happen. Where if you're doing that digitally, it would be a lot easier in a lot of ways. And just even do that and make sure that, it looks like water, and layering it is such a cool thing to do. And obviously it's just these 3 images, obviously the image that looks like comics and is the 6 panels is obviously sort of regular art, and the other 2 are watercolors, and it's amazing just to look at that stuff. Because
Well,
I can't do.
the funny thing about that middle image is that those pants are computer, and the body that's floating in the background is computer. It's part of, and also the little bit of that's in the page prior. It's part of the transition where the what's under the water at the moment, and what's in the background is the guy from the plane crash. And then as he just gets pulled out of the water, he becomes the tribe. Well, he's like a chief, really, tribesman of his island. And so it's the transitional moment of going from the plane crash to the other life that he's about to lead.
And so obviously, the story sort of goes that way, and I don't want to ruin too much. And then the last story I want to talk about is a silent story. And I know this was very hard with the words. I know it was very difficult. The word bubbles were horrendous on this one. All jokes aside, obviously it's a woman and her son, and her son is dressed as Dracula, I think is a safe assumption. And it's sort of his interaction walking around, I guess, Philly with his mom and doing activities and some stuff, and other people get in and he's making faces and they're making faces back at him, and a bunch of other people are all interacting. And for the most part, I think a bunch of people in the 5 other stories are sort of interacting with each other, and a few other new people are interacting. And then ultimately, he hits his day and he's playing, and his dad comes home, and his dad happens to be the guy at the bus stop. And that's sort of how this all ends. And so it's a very nice, position from the start of somebody's day going to work all the way through to him getting home. And then it's wrapped up as he's sort of hugging his son and kissing his wife.
Yeah, and that was one of those. I came over that story, and I was thinking it would just be a separate, short story that I could probably submit to an anthology at some point. Just a quick story about a kid, and then the way that story works is it goes from one person's story to another person's story to another person's story, in a very, like Richard Linklater does in a lot of his earlier independent films, where you just kind of flow from conversation to conversation to conversation, except this one's silent. Um, and that was the original intention of the story, but I wasn't planning on putting this in this book. And it wasn't until I got to the, um, the part after treading water, where the main character gets to work and then he's getting a ride home. And I was just sitting there, and as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the cars in the road, and then I just thought about a kid playing with the cars, and I was like, oh crap, I have to add that story to this, don't I? I was like, it wasn't my plan, but I couldn't find, I couldn't conceive. I was going to end the book on a sad note, in a way. Um, you kind of had a bitter taste, but it was a good bitter taste. And then I just I had no choice. I had to add the story. It just fit, and then that gives it sort of a happy ending, but it's more like just an everyday kind of ending too. I mean, you're married, you have kids, you go to work, you come home, they're happy to see you, hopefully, you know, and that's just the way life is. No one like is thinking, oh, he must have had a really crappy day waiting for a bus all day. They're just like, oh, I'm happy to see you.
And that's the thing that I like about this book is that it's just sort of a mundane day with this character, and then it's all of these stories that interact, and then he comes home and he has a wife, he has a kid, his kid's happy to see him, he seems happy to see his kid, and it's just sort of that entire thing where it's a crazy day if we look at these six stories and how they interact with each other, but it's also the idea that, well, this is just also a normal day at the same time. And it's very nice to leave it on a happy note, especially with a book like this, where it wraps up really nicely. And then, we can imagine that this is what is his next day going to look like? If this is just a, and that's my question is that what does his next day look like in this world? And so it's super, super interesting because this is sort of just clockwork, and I can relate to this very, very well. So that I love it.
I mean, I have other ideas for another book. It's one of those things, like kind of how this one organically kind of came to me, story to story. I'm letting the next book kind of come to me, story to story, and this one really burnt me out. I mean, 7 years of working on the same book, I'm tired of looking at them. I don't want to touch them anymore. I like reading them, but I don't want to. I was just tired of working on the book. Um, so obviously, if I make another one, I'm not going to do the whole thing by myself. But I'm letting the stories kind of flow to me for another book sometime far, far down the line. But I never thought about what's the guy's next day going to look like. Like, you know, would I want to use the same character and have that as the mid flow for that day, or just take the same concept and move on from there?
Yeah, and I think it is. It's very interesting, and I think you can go either way, and I think that the concept is really, really good, and I think that that's kind of what it draws is that it's mundane. For me, it's just a normal day where the guy's waiting. Everybody's waited for something in their life. Everybody's waited for transportation, whether you're waiting an hour for your Uber, 20 minutes for an Uber, or you're waiting because the metro. I used to live in DC. The metros sometimes it gets broken, and there's been days where I've waited like 40 minutes for a metro, and it's a pain in the ass. I've waited on a metro for like 30 minutes once because the metro ahead of us was broken.
Oh
So I
man,
think I don't know what you have in Philly. I mean, you guys have a subway system. I don't know what it's called. Is it called the trolley or is it
we,
just?
we have an L, so um, it's elevated from West Philly, and then goes underground through Center City, and then once you get back into North Philly, it goes back to elevated. So everyone calls it the L, even though they're part of it is a subway system. And then we have trolleys that are above ground and underground, and we have regional rail trains, which are the more cushier ones, but they always end up with long delays, and they don't run as often as like the L would.
And so just there's so much stuff that can be done with this. And so obviously though, I do want to talk a little inside baseball because doing a book like this, which is definitely more of a graphic novel than a comic, because this isn't a single floppy. It wouldn't work as a single floppy. It would be way too crazy and it just wouldn't make any sense. So what prompted you as a creator to want to put this in a graphic novel and do a graphic novel and do this as a self-containing story? Because obviously I think the story partially dictates itself, but obviously there are ways and when you're creating this that you're going a certain direction. And also what has that been like for you? Because obviously pushing a graphic novel is different than putting out a comic. And
Oh,
obviously Kickstarter does favors both. There's nothing wrong with either one of these, and both have been successful. It's not an issue with that. It's just that they have different paths on Kickstarter. So what has that been like?
tough. Um, to do it as a graphic novel, I think when I started, graphic novels were still a big thing. Because there was a time in the industry where, everyone was pushing the graphic novel. The single floppy comic book was, more of a fandom kind of thing. The graphic novel was accessible for everyone. Um, Only in the last couple of years, I started to notice that companies have really reduced their graphic novel push,
So
especially
so do
original
you
graphic
think
novels.
that sorry to interrupt, but this is I'm actually super curious because I read a lot of digital graphic novels. I have a comicsology subscription, and so I read a lot of digital graphic novels. I read a lot of single issues. Obviously, I have a single issue subscription with certain comic shops, but also I buy a lot of graphic novels because sometimes I miss something from 3 years ago, and I'm not going to go track down the single issues.
Hmm.
So, because I noticed that a lot of kids, their first comic is bringing a big graphic novel up to somebody's table, like, "Hey, this is my first comic. Can you sign it?" And do you think that that has now sort of swung the other way, or do you think that that's still in play, or do you think that it's sort of in the middle? Because obviously on Kickstarter, I see a lot of single book issues, and
Yeah.
I'm on the comic book investing side. So for me, I buy and sell high key issues and I buy and sell CGC books. So I'm a mixture of all of this. So I'm curious from your perspective, not necessarily from an investor side or even a fan side, but even from just a creator side where it's all going because it's super weird for me because I'm not on that side.
Yeah, it's like I think it's kind of 50-50 when it comes to new readers, because it all depends on the reader. The younger kids are probably going to be more apt to get floppy because it's more accessible for their age. And then new readers that are more in the late middle school to high school, if they're a new reader, they're probably want to get the full story, to know what the full story is, because by then they're probably familiar with like Bone and Persepolis. So they're like, I know what a graphic novel feels like. I want to get a graphic novel, and then maybe start collecting it from there. And like I was helping out my local comic book shop. I help out sometimes and cover the counter, and I had a girl come in looking for I think the second book of Umbrella Academy, which we didn't have any. Um, so I was trying to show her other book ideas. She ended up walking out with Invincible, which I was really proud of because I didn't. I'm used to, and I don't want to sound judgmental or sexist when I say this, because it's just more of the history that I've grown up with, and I was proud of her for getting Invincible because of this. But I'm used to girls when they first start into comics not liking superheroes, not wanting a superhero book, going for something that's a little bit more uh, mind depth. Most of the girls back in the day, their first book was, if it wasn't anime or manga, it was Sandman. Um, so I was showing her Paper Girls and something else and Invincible, and she walked out with Invincible, which is still an amazing read, and I love Invincible. Speaking of characters who die and stay dead, that's one of them. Um, but except for what two characters that came back for life, one's called the Immortal. So I mean, you know, um, so it was. I was kind of like, oh wow, here's a girl who's getting a superhero book, but it's not Batman, it's not Spider-Man. She's getting an intelligent uh, superhero book with consequences, and I was like, that's a really good choice, and I was happy for her to get that. Um, so I think, but when people become, are more of adult age and collectors, and usually people like us who've been collecting since we were kids, the single issues are what all the companies are pushing. Alternative press got rid of their graphic novels unless it's a collection. They no longer print, original graphic novels anymore. And they also took themselves out of Diamond Press, and they're not really widely distributed, but the cost for them is cheaper to do the single issues, and I think all the companies are starting to go that direction, and it's rare, rare to find a graphic novel that's made to be a graphic novel anymore. So it's harder to sell that, even on Kickstarter, where, like you're saying, the single issues, there's a lot of them on there. I think what I was even told from the consultant that I talked to was that this is too big for a first Kickstarter. They should have done it like a smaller single issue. It's hard to sell the graphic novel. People want the smaller stuff because it's cheaper. You have a smaller goal, it's easier to reach it. Yeah, I mean, my goal is not small. It's $6,000, and 2,000 of that is to get it colored, and the rest of it is for printing. I'm not making. I have no plans to make any money off of this. I want. I mean, if it goes beyond 6,000, I'd be ecstatic. Just meeting the goal, I would be ecstatic. That's all I want to get my book out. I don't really care about making money off of this, even though I'm poor and unemployed. I just want my book out.
So even to go further into this, because obviously manga is huge now, and manga outsold comics, and manga also got graphic novels into like BNN and other stuff. Manga was the gateway, and even talking about that, how has Kickstarter been? Because Kickstarter has been a very interesting place as of lately, and Kickstarter, I've been saying this, and I got made fun of for it, is that I was very skeptical of Keanu Reeves and Scott Snyder on Kickstarter, not because they didn't belong there. I think they had a right to be there. My concern, and I think I'm right on this, and I got made fun of for it, and I got attacked for it, and people owe me an apology, I feel, is that I said, look, they're bringing a lot of air into the room. And the saying is, when the tide rises, it raises all ships. In 2020, when they were on there, more projects were getting funded, more goals were being achieved, and better things were happening. And now that they're out of it, the tide is lower again, and more projects statistically are failing,
Yeah,
which means that they created a void. It's the
yeah,
same issue. I'm a big WWE fan. I made this argument about Ronda Rousey. Again, got attacked for it. And I said, when she leaves and she doesn't come back, it's going to create a void in the women's division. What happened? Created a void, because then a bunch of stuff was put on Becky Lynch, and then they had to drop that, and a bunch of stuff was put on Charlotte, and Charlotte dropped out of it, and then now you have a women's division in wrestling that legitimately took 18 months to recover. So that's what's happening on Kickstarter. So how do you feel about Kickstarter? Because it's a very weird dynamic, and it's not an issue anymore of people being able to have a right on there. It's that there are consequences for big names coming on.
yeah. Give me a moment here. My phone is on to 8%. I'm gonna get this closer to power supply real quick.
Take your time.
I'm like watching my phone slowly go down. Yeah, that's real professional there. Sorry about that. And I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do? Luckily, I'm right by my computer, and I have a cord here. That's my TARDIS cup I told you about. That's rolling all the time. There we are. Now we get to see more of my messy basement office ceiling. Okay, so yeah, so when it comes to everyone has the right to have something on Kickstarter and try to get it funded. There's no doubt about that. Lighting here is terrible, like too much light. But my concern with the Berserker was, there's like two things. one, okay, he has the money. It's not like he really needed the Kickstarter. It was more of like a marketing ploy for him. They would have easily been able to make the book and sell it, and nobody would have thought anything of it. Plus, Boom Studios had the money to print it. They admitted that at the very beginning. So why are they raising money to do something they already can? So basically, everything they got from Kickstarter was just profit because they could do it anyways, and they were going to sell out, which they did. And they still are with Berserker, and it's a good book. I do get it, you know. But you're right about the Void too, like because I know when it was out, this one Kickstarter podcast that I don't actually listen to the show so much as follow the Facebook pages and stuff that I'm on. And it was like, one of the things he was saying is like, don't worry about a big name being on there because the big name being on there is good for you because what's good for the goose is good for the gander when they're on. But as you're pointing out, and and I didn't think about it before, but it really is true. They create a huge vacuum when they're not on there. And I notice, it's like I get kind of only partially bitter, I guess, to some of the more established creators like Palmiotti that like have things on Kickstarter instead of getting it published. But those people like Palmiotti, he's probably pushing a Kickstarter because, why go through a publisher for this when I can make some things that are mainstream, get paid by those companies, and then push my what I love, what I want to do, and fund it. But he's a big name, so he's almost guaranteed to fund it. People like uh, Greg Rousseau. He's a big name, and he's almost guaranteed to fund it. But on the other hand, Craig Rousseau's stuff that he publishes on Kickstarter is so out of the mainstream that no one would have printed. He'll do like mythologies that he wrote, or I think he was doing operas. He was like drawing operas into comic book form. Who would print that? Nobody. But it's Craig Rousseau. He's an amazing, amazing artist. I got to meet him once. He's a really nice guy. So that's a name that can create a gap, but yet at the same time, his is so niche, so incredibly niche, that most of the time people are buying it just because of his name and to be able to enjoy the beauty of his artwork and not because of the story that's actually involved, which is a shame because to me, the story would probably be, just as important, but his books are also really expensive. I couldn't afford his Kickstarters in the least bit.
I can't afford most people's Kickstarters, and I know the feeling. I'm in between jobs, and I am very penny tight with my money. Especially
Yeah,
especially when people have like $60 books, I'm tapped out at 25.
yeah, and that's where my book is. Like most of my backers have been at the 25 because that's the signed copy. I was lucky to have the first day somebody backed my $200 tier, which was original page from one of the painted story, Treading Water, which would be sad to get rid of. But I mean, if you were going to buy artwork from the book, what would you prefer? A black and white page or the painted one? And if there's a $50 difference, what would you go for?
That
Personally, if
is
I had
true.
the money, I'd buy the painted page, Um, and they're like a collector in California, so good for them. But I just yesterday, the day before, I added on an extra tier of T-shirts. So like, here's one of them right here. I got this printed a while back, and so I decided to make that. Yeah, there you go. My new tier. It's sort of in between the $35 and the $100. So it's like you have that midway where you don't want to spend that much, but I mean, the T-shirts alone, after shipping and taxes, are like $20 a top. So you get that with a signed copy. You're not spending much more than what it would normally cost, anyways. But you get a shirt
So
out.
to even talk about this, because obviously I do want to get into rewards. So obviously you could back the project for, you could donate obviously without any rewards. And there's like a $3 shout out which is just a thank you, sort of more than just backing without support. Then there's digital copy, and then there's the soft cover copy. Then there's the signature numbered and signed copies, and then there's a sketch card fan of a character from the book that I think you're doing. And then obviously, there's the original page, which is black and white. Then there's the painted page. Then there's some T-shirts, and then I forget. I think there's one more reward as well.
It might be. I think one of them is a black and white my choice, and one's a black and white your choice.
And so I think that yeah, that might be it. And so obviously, its original art can be expensive. Original art is sometimes expensive. It's sometimes cheap. Commissions can be expensive. No question about all that. So obviously, what is it like to have these many rewards? Because obviously, having a signed copy of a book is always cool, and numbered copies are fun, and all that stuff. And so obviously, what has this been like? And also, just offering original art is something that people really like.
Um, it's like I know what it's like. There's a lot of people who love to collect original artwork. Whether it's a custom sketch. People have those sketchbooks they take around to cons and get them drawn by so and so. I have a friend from the comic book store who has a book that he like shows off sometimes, like, oh, I had this artist draw on here, and I had this artist draw on here. And I've done that as an artist at a con. Somebody had a book that was like dedicated to the Crow, and James O'Barr drew the first page, and then you'd have all these variety of different artists at different levels draw the Crow in there. To me, I'm not a fan of the Crow, but when he handed it to me, I was like, sure, I'll draw the Crow. I got to be in the book with James O'Barr and a lot of other really amazing artists. Um, so I was like, okay, that's cool. I mean, I may not be a fan of the actual comic book or the movie, but I can't, dismiss O'Barr as a person or as an artist, as a creator. You know, just because you don't like one thing doesn't mean there's nothing else, by that person. And so it is still an honor from someone who said that as established as he is. So there's people out there who just love original artwork. So it's like I can't just limit myself to a custom sketch card. That's okay. It's great. People want pages too. Like those are things you put in a frame. You're like, this is from this book. I love this page. And to me, it hurts. It hurts to get rid of artwork. As much as it takes up space, it's still painful because it's like I have so much of a connection to it. I don't want anyone else to have it, but yet I want everyone else to have it. I've only sold a few like original pages, and even to this day, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm missing those, but it's okay. I
It's
can live
also it's
without it.
also what right now. I'm in between jobs and I'm selling my personal comics, not like the ultra personal stuff, but the stuff that I love that I know once I sell I will never see again, type
Yeah,
stuff. I'm asking good money for it, and it's not like I'm just selling it for dirt cheap, and I'm taking my sweet time on selling it. Because I've legitimately stopped the bleeding tremendously, but I know and I feel pain when this happens, but I also know when people the good stuff people spend money for, people really want that stuff, and people are willing to spend really good money, and I know where some of this stuff is going. And I know that the people who are buying this, and the way I view it is that my time with this item has come to an end, and I was only a
yeah.
caretaker for it, and now it's
Hmm.
somebody else's turn. But then there are other books that I just had listed up on eBay, and I'm like, I can't do this. I just can't get rid of it right now, and that's the way it is sometimes. And
I have a
so
couple of
obviously,
things. Yeah, I have some things in my possession that I know people would like. Back in '98, I think. Oh shit! I-
no.
Hello. I'm
And you're back.
yeah. I don't know how long the video part will last, but my daughter's getting me headphones. So if this, because I'm at 2% but plugged in, if this does it does shut off on me, I'll connect audio to my desktop. I have a laptop, but it's like I don't know where
It's
it is right
all
now,
good.
anyways. But it takes forever to start up, so I end up not using it most of the time.
It's all good, so don't worry. So obviously, when you sell the good stuff, it's painful.
Yeah. So I was saying like in about '99, I think around then, Black Sabbath was having their reunion tour, original four members, and so they had like an album of the tour, and they were going around signing. And I was working at a music store, now defunct, and I got the opportunity to actually work at the store that they were signing. And I was like, "What?" So I brought my friends with me, and um, so while I was there, sorry, I got pictures of the band. Um, I also got it was great because I went out looking for my friends and I came back in and I'm going to tell the story, the short story version, but I was trying to go to the bathroom and it just happened to be the same time that Black Sabbath was taking a break. And as I'm waiting for somebody to get out of the bathroom, they're taking forever. Out comes Bill Ward, the drummer, blocking the doorway to the bathroom, just standing there with the door open, and I'm like trying to sneak behind him to get to the bathroom because I really had to pee. And Ozzy's like, "Bill, move out of the way. The kid's trying to use the bathroom." By the time I came out, they were gone. They were back at the signing table. So I got pictures of them after the whole thing, and of course a CD signed as well. And that's something that I mean I have the negatives, so I can always print them if I need to. But that's something that I can to part with, mostly because the best part of that story is the part that I can't sell. Being recognized by Ozzy Osbourne for a second was really cool.
And so obviously, departing art is hard, and I know the feeling of it, and I have commissions that I have no desire to sell at any
Yeah,
point, and I know all about selling comics and all that stuff, and there's things to sell, there's things not to sell, and what you do is that you hopefully only sell what you have to sell to make it, and obviously when you're funding a Kickstarter, original art can get you over the hump.
yeah,
And so, having said all that, I do want to shift a little bit because I don't want to occupy your entire night, and I don't want my parents to kill me for keeping them up during this interview. I value my life, and if I'm in my parents' house rent free, I got to abide by their rules to some degree and be respectful. But I am curious on what you feel about conventions because I know you've gone to cons before, and I know it's a hard shift. I know it's a hard shift, but it's how do you feel about cons and where they're going? Because obviously conventions are very much the Wild West right now, where they haven't happened for 18 months, and now they're happening. And with the Delta virus coming down the pike, and nobody knows what the hell it is, nobody knows anything about COVID in general. In reality, all I know is that it's not good, and this Delta variant has a lot of people scared shitless.
yeah. I have a mixed bag of feelings about conventions, all in all.
Would you like me
I
to go
mean,
first? I'll go first.
you
I
go, yeah,
am taking a break till June 2022. Obviously, economically, I'm not in a good position to go to cons. I think that I still need a break from it. If I didn't already mention money's a bit tight in my life right now. Also, I don't want to do New York Comic Con. It's too big for me. It's
yeah.
it, it's a little too big for me. I obviously have a disability. I'm not interested in going to a con that has more than 20 to 25,000 people. A hundred
Where do
thousand is too much for me.
where do you live?
I live in Connecticut, so for
Oh,
me, 100,000 is just too much,
yeah.
and just there's too many people. I don't feel comfortable in a 90,000 giant football stadium, but I'm sitting in a seat and also I'm a Giants fan, so I'll suck it up. And people are relatively respectful if you're not wearing a Cowboys jersey. So, which would be
Yeah,
really bad if
here in Philadelphia too. Yeah, yeah. You get. There are some rare Cowboy fans here for some reason, and it's like a
but
bitter enemy here.
But, 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 but my point I'm trying to make is that I'm not doing anything until 2022 in June,
yeah,
earliest, because I
I-
want to let the dust settle. So I'm curious how you feel about where it's going and even how cons have to adjust because I've never sat behind a table. I've never bought a table. I've never been a vendor or a dealer. I've only been a panelist and I've been a fan. And so I don't know how you feel about it and where it's going.
um, I think that's the smartest move. I mean, okay, I can understand why the cons are opening up because one of the things is first of all, you don't want to be forgotten. Uh, Second, everyone's kind of itching. They're getting this, cabin fever, and just to be able to do something that they felt like they've always been able to do, and suddenly now we can't, is like, you know, let's make it available. But not all cons are opening. San Diego Comic Con is not going to be open. Or didn't open. They did like a digital panel discussions and stuff like that. Um, and I think big ones, like New York, shouldn't open. Smaller ones, I can see that, especially those like really small. They're mostly collectors cons. Totally, that's fine because there's not like you can really keep the distance there at those places. No, excuse me, no problem. So I can understand why they want to open because it's just that itchy feeling, and yet at the same time, it's like keeping your distance from one of those things is not a bad idea. I mean, who would tell you that keeping distance and safe from other people so you don't catch a disease is a bad idea? No one, no, unless they're Trump. I mean, no one would tell you that. And I think all those cons should require masks, no matter, regardless of. I mean, especially the bigger ones should require masks regardless of vaccinations or not. Like I'm fully vaccinated, so it would be a problem for me. But yet the same thing is, I could technically catch the Delta variant, even though it wouldn't be nearly as bad for me as other people. I shouldn't get myself and the risk. Or if I even had it and didn't know it was asymptomatic, I shouldn't get other people in the risk. If I was going to
I
be in a
mean, I'll one
big
up you.
situation, should be masked.
I'll one up you on something. So con crud is real. We know it. I know it. And you ever been to a con and then Monday morning you're not feeling too hot? I
I was
mean,
definitely not too, but yeah, I know that can be a thing.
and so for me, I'm not ready to jump back into the swimming pool and I'm fully vaccinated. It's not COVID that I'm worried about. It's I don't want to catch the flu and I don't want to subject myself to anything that's complicated, not to mention that economically I'm a wreck.
Yeah,
Meaning I'm not going to be homeless in the next 6 months, but I don't have an extra, $1,000 to spend at a con. I'm using and also, I mean, I have a lot of inventory in my business of buying and selling comics. And so I don't want to carry and buy any new merch that I need to carry and flip because that's just not where I stand on the issue. And furthermore, I don't know who's coming out to this stuff, and then God forbid, what does it look like in October? Because, and also, there's just a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, and also New York City isn't exactly safe right now. It's really not. It's problematic. I just left DC. You're in Philly, right? Philly has the
yeah,
worst homelessness in the country. I
really?
mean, it's up there. It's like 13%, which is crazy. You as a city have a big homeless problem.
That sucks. We have a lot of problems. We have a overweight problem. We have apparently one year we were just written as the worst drivers in America. As much as everyone in Philly complains about New Jersey drivers, apparently we're worse.
Whoa, whoa,
We
whoa,
are pretty
whoa.
bad. I mean, we're pretty jerky around here. Hey, I'm driving here. It's just
Anyway, I don't want to get you in trouble. We're already ostracizing New Jersey off of your customer base here. I don't think this is a good marketing plan for us.
It's a Philly thing. I mean, it's pretty much anywhere in any city. Your city's the best kind of mentality. So you think other drivers are worse than you. You know all that stuff.
Even going further, because and I'm not touching cons till 2022, just in June, just because of
That's smart.
my situation, and I don't want to risk it, and I also want to see where the dust settles. And I think it's very important to understand, saying, look, if you want to go to a con, I'm not going to stop you. I mean, I'm not too sure if masks should or shouldn't be required. I don't know, to be honest, but I'm not going because I just don't want to risk. And also, it seems to me that it's going to be like the Wild West, where it's going to be very chaotic. I feel, and I feel
Yeah.
that it's not going to be clean. And when you have 100,000 people, we don't know what cosplayers are going to be doing, and there's just so many unknowns in my world. And also, I'm a panelist. Our panel seat's going to be limited. Like I have a million questions for New York Comic Con, and I would love to have them on this show to say, look, I have a million questions as a fan, and I would love to do this interview and let's just address some of these questions because that's where I stand on the issue. Is that if I speak to 250 people and now I can only speak to 120, it becomes very not advantageous for me because I'm trying to sell you me and my podcast and my brand, and now you cut my sellability in half.
Yeah.
And that's an issue, and it's a big issue I think for creators, where if now you basically say, well, 70,000 people can come in, not 100,000, you just cut my margins by 30%.
So what do you do as a panelist? Are you like the panelist host?
So I host, I do the PowerPoint all by myself. I talk about the topics all by myself, and I'm a one man show, and I come up with concepts. And I've done everything from comic book investing to talk about podcasting and media, and talk about manga like Osamu Tezuka, to just sports animes and comics and a variety of other things. And so I basically build an entire PowerPoint for 45 minutes of talk,
Oh, okay.
and I
I
don't get paid for it.
no, people don't normally get paid to be a panelist. They just do it for the fun of it. Um, yeah, I've been to only a handful of panels. I went to um,
But this
I'm
is
trying to
not
think of
about
the name.
me. Not
Yeah,
about
yeah,
me.
I know. I've been
About
to
you.
the co-creator of Deadpool. That's not Rob Liefeld. He was at Keystone Con here in Philly one year, so I went to his, and it was and Webtoons was hosting or sponsoring the show, and so he was doing a Webtoons with Ryan Otley, and no with Brian Brown, and so he was kind of promoting that, and they were doing like how to get into comics and how to get into Webtoons. That was an interesting panel discussion. I went to one with the guy who played Spike on Buffy, um, but very few panels really. As much as I want to be, and go to more panels, I never get the chance to. Especially when you have a table, it's like you look at the list and you're like, oh, I can't get away.
So obviously, I don't want to occupy your entire night here, but I do also want to give you an opportunity to promote yourself. And obviously, you have a Kickstarter going on that needs a lot of love. So where can people find your Kickstarter? Where can people find you on social media? Facebook pages, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok if you got it, Snapchat, websites. And where can people support you? Because it is super important at this point to support indie content creators. And so, where can people do all that?
Okay. First of all, the Kickstarter. You
Links
can
up
just
above. Links up above.
you got the link above.
Links above and down below if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Link is up above or down below.
Okay. So
So
yeah, and
check
that
it out. But where can people
if
find it
you're not
regardless?
looking at it, you think about it later. It's lethophobia.site is the address I bought for that. I have a website uh, called absolutelynotcomics.com, and that it's with an X at the end of comics instead of the CS. And that's the same absolute not comics with an X is my Instagram and my Facebook. that primarily promotes this book, but you can also find me under Asher Humm on Facebook and Instagram. My Twitter is, it's an odd one. It's PYCCA, which is Pica underscore Asher. And the history between that, I used to have it just Pica, but I got too many people from Argentina tagging me for a store in Argentina that I'm not. So I had to change my name, even though I had it a lot longer than the department store. Um, see, I have a Deviant Art, which is also under Pica, Pycca. It's another one of those characters I haven't used yet. He's a fat black Cajun guy who has he's able to digest and eat anything, so he does. He's like a living furnace inside, and he'll eat a table if he wants to. And pica is kind of it's derived from a eating disorder of wanting to pretty much eat anything. Um, so same friend who came up with that character came up with the inspiration to Dorian Tesla, which was Adder Jack. He's got a very sick sense of humor. He's really funny. Um, and but I don't have a TikTok and I think I have a Snapchat, but I never use it, so it's not worth it. Those are the prime places to find me, and the only place I take support is on my Kickstarter. I have no Patreon. I want one, but I have nothing to kind of shell right now as far as look at the process I'm working on. But maybe the next project I have some story ideas I'm working on, and we plan on trying to find either get them published from a publisher or again Kickstart. They'll be a little bit more accessible because they're going to be short story, like like limited series kind of thing with a regular comic book. So it'll be smaller size, smaller price tag, smaller publishing need kind of thing. And that one I might have a Patreon started for that. But right now it's Twitter, Pica underscore Asher, and then everything else is pretty much absolutely not comics with an X.
And then
You can see on my T-shirts, it's the logo shirt. That's how you spell it.
And then obviously, I've been saying this all last year. I'm going to continue to say it this year: is you have to support indie creators, and what that means is that you have to back their Kickstarters, you have to back their projects, you actually have to read their projects. Like you got to listen to this podcast and this Facebook thing. You got to support it in every which way. Backing a Kickstarter is super important. Backing my project and buying me a coffee, I would appreciate it. But
Coffee.
what I really want is I want people to share it, and a share can go a long way. And that's what I've been trying to explain to people is that sharing your Kickstarter out. You don't know who's watching, you don't know when they're watching, you don't know who's looking for something very interesting to read, and maybe they're like, oh man, this is great. And if it gets in front of the right person, they're going to buy it, and it makes a huge difference in that realm. And so I encourage everybody to share Kickstarters out there. If you want to back it, please back it. And you find what we spoke about the last hour and almost 2 hours at this point fascinating. You should back it, but even more so, you should share it out there because it makes a huge difference. And I cannot emphasize it enough. And if you're going to share the project out, and Asher's project, you might as well share my podcast out and this project out as well, because that also makes a big difference. And that's all I'm asking people to do, because it makes a big difference and it matters right now more than anything else. And so on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, I'm going to be sharing this, not just because I'm on it. I've definitely enjoyed talking to you. So this has been, definitely going to follow you at this point. I didn't know much about you beforehand, but you're really interesting to listen to. And so I definitely everyone recommend subscribing to him and sharing it and give him a cup of coffee, and then back my book. You know, a little cautious. A coffee and a book.
Well, I'm not advised and against compliments. I love compliments, and I'll take compliments. And on that note, I believe that is a wrap.
Thank you.